Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, MILE.
At this session here, and I'm thrilled to be able to talk about this topic of how to succeed in the new future of work. This is a topic that I'm very passionate about, and I suspect that you're passionate about it as well, and that's why you're here today. So I do appreciate the introduction. My name again is David Willden. I'm the author of the book Creating You, Inc., and I'm also, as was mentioned, the CEO of Breakthrough Practices. And if you were going to ask me, if you said, hey David, what's your passion? I'd say, well, my passion really is helping leaders and helping organizations to experience breakthroughs, especially by unleashing and tapping into the passions and the potential of their employees. So let me go ahead and jump into our agenda today. The first thing that I'd like to do is to share with you an outside-in approach to leadership and to reinvention. Now, this outside-in approach is a method, it's an approach that I have used for 20 plus years as I have led reinvention initiatives. And this approach has led repeatedly to very profound results. And so we'll focus on this approach, and we'll focus specifically on change management. What were some of the change management things that we did that really helped us to get the kind of results that we did? And then the second thing that we're going to do is we're going to focus on the future. So what do we think the future is going to look like? And how can we begin to understand that and begin to prepare ourselves not only for the future so that we can succeed in the future, but also so that we can begin to succeed today. And the third thing that we're going to focus on is, what is the biggest leadership challenge? What is that big challenge today? And then what do we need to do to really be able to excel at that challenge? And then fourthly, and most importantly, what we'll do is we'll focus on this inside-out approach to leadership and to reinvention. And this inside-out approach is what we're going to spend the bulk of our time focused on. It is what's most profound. It is what I'm most passionate about. And so I look forward to reviewing that content with you. Now, let me share with you the outside-in approach from the perspective of my experience. So by looking at my experience, that'll help you to understand this model a little bit more. So as was mentioned, my experience is in the areas of strategy, leading reinventions and turnarounds of organizations, also in establishing corporate project management offices and managing those offices. And then I have focused on leadership and people development. Now, about 20 of those years I've spent actually leading those reinvention initiatives. And I've done that both as a consultant and then also as a senior executive. And I've done it both in the private and the public sector, including the nonprofit arena as well. And of course, our objective when we launched these re-engineering or reinvention projects was always to significantly improve the performance of the organization. So here's the approach that we used. And I'll describe this to you at a high level, and I'll describe it in a way that hopefully is simple for you to understand. It might be simple to understand, but implementing it sometimes can be a tricky process. So the very first thing that I would do is I would work with the stakeholders, and we would identify the right team members, and then together, the very first thing that we would do is we would take a look at the customers of the organization. So we identify those target customers. Now, in many organizations, what people do in terms of really trying to understand what the customers want is they'll depend on surveys or they'll depend on data. Now, what we would do is we would focus on the most profound and the simplest way to really understand those target customers. We would go to their location. We would understand their environment. We would ask them, we would establish a relationship of trust. We would ask them what their greatest pains were, what their greatest aspirations were, We would learn more about how they accomplish their work, how they perform their work. And then we would ask them to give us honest, aggressive feedback regarding the strengths and weaknesses of our products and services. And we would ask them for their suggestions. So once we really understood the customers, and that was step one, then what we would do is we would really analyze the results of the organization. And we wouldn't just look at performance measures. Performance measures are important, but as we know, performance measures are lagging indicators. So we'd use a balanced scorecard type of a methodology, and we would look at customers. To what extent was the organization successful in really meeting the needs of the customers? We'd look at the operations. We would look at the people-related metrics. And so we try to get a clear understanding of the organization from a complete perspective. Then what we would do is we'd say, okay, let's look at strategy. What have we been doing to try to help our organization really achieve the results that it wanted to achieve? What was our strategy for doing that? What are the strengths and weaknesses of those strategies? And then, once we understood this existing strategy, then we would go in and really look at the operations of the organization. We would understand those operations. And we would look at how effective the operations were and being able to help the organization achieve the results that it wanted to. But then we would look at the efficiency of the operations as well. So we would focus on baseline metrics. We would, if it was possible, we would also identify best practice data and identify the gaps, the opportunities for improvement. And then what we would do within that context is really understand the roles, the responsibilities, the needed skills, the needed strengths, and we would assess how the people operations of the organization, to what extent it was successful. And then within that context, we would look at the culture of the organization. Now, so my experience in management consulting has taught me, and this is based on research, that most management consultant recommendations, most recommendations are not implemented, or they're not fully implemented. So the approach that I would use is to first of all make sure that I established a relationship, a very close working relationship with the key stakeholder, the CEO in many cases. And we would sit down and we would understand one another, and I would let them know how important it was to really play a lead role in this initiative. And then what we would do is we establish clear goals with each other. And then we would say, okay, let's charter the right teams. And this is what's most important here, is I would take the teams through a discovery process. So it was a discovery process of helping them to assess the organization using the model that I just shared with you, helping them to do best practice research, to actually go out and visit together organizations that were best practices, helping them to go through creative exercises, and then helping them to design solutions to the problems, pilot those, work out the bugs, make sure that the pilots would deliver the kind of results that we were hoping for, and then we would fully implement those suggestions. Now, this is interesting. According to McKinsey, and this is based on their many years of working with a wide range of consultants, it's based on their research, substantive research. What they have found is that the reasons that most new initiatives in organizations, and a new initiative could be a new strategy, it can be a new product, it can be a new change initiative. The reason most of those, around 70% of those, fail is because, number one, there isn't employee buy-in to the changes, to the initiative. And number two, because management behavior does not support the change. And so I would make sure and use a very transparent, a very inclusive change management approach. In other words, I would involve as many people as possible, and I made sure that these people were involved in a very productive way. And so by involving a lot of people, This helped us to discover the best ideas, to create passionate buy-in, and obviously it helped us to significantly improve the implementation time. And so when we follow this reinvention approach, the bottom line results were almost always profound. The first organization I helped through this process, we realized over $100 million in savings. Now, let me go ahead and switch gears. And let's focus on the future. What is the future going to look like? Well, that's hard for any of us to speculate. But what I would like to do is review with you some megatrends that solid research, some of the most substantive research regarding the future has pointed to. So let me go ahead and share some of those things with you. It is estimated between now and the year 2030, and this is consistent in all of the most reliable research studies that I've looked at, that there is going to be a significant increase throughout the world in individual empowerment. And we're seeing that today. And why is that the case? Well, we're going to be, and we're already seeing, broad access to information. We're seeing significantly improved communication technologies. We're looking at, and we will see, greater educational attainment. We're seeing the ability of people throughout the world to have more influence with their governments. We're going to see significantly improved health care. And we're looking at reduced poverty. So between now and the year 2030, it's estimated that an additional 1 billion people throughout the world are going to move out of poverty and into the middle class. And what does this mean? Well, it means that we're going to have higher demand for consumer goods. So let's shift gears and talk about demographics. So it's estimated that the world's population today is at about 7 billion people. By the year 2030, it's estimated that the world's population is going to grow to 8.3 billion people. Now, today, about half of those people live in cities. By the year 2030, it's estimated that 60% of the world's total population, about 4.9 billion of 8.3 billion people, will live in the cities. So the growth of cities is going to be significant, and it's going to tax this. It's going to be a problem. Also, it is estimated that people are going to live longer in the future than we even believe is possible today. And what that's going to mean is there are going to be countries that are going to have higher proportions of seniors, of older people who are not in the workplace. And what is that going to mean? Well, those countries are going to have slower GDP growth. So Europe is going to be impacted by this. Parts of Asia, for instance, Japan and the United States, is going to be impacted by this. Now, with a growth of the middle class, and also with a growth in population, by the year 2030, it's estimated that food needs are going to increase 35%, water needs are going to increase by 40%, and energy needs are going to increase by 45%. And the big worry is if climate changes, if they continue, wet areas, they're going to get wetter, and dry areas are going to become more arid, and this is going to tax the world in terms of our collective ability to be able to provide for the food, the water, and the energy needs of the world. And some countries are going to be hit particularly hard by this challenge. Now, it's also estimated by the year 2030 that there is not going to be a dominant superpower. And some argue that this means that there's going to be a greater potential for conflict. And we can see today that there's less willingness of traditional powers to jump in and intervene in conflicts that don't directly impact them. So this means that collaboration is going to become more and more critical, more and more important. It's also estimated that power is going to shift towards networks that will form to be able to influence state and global actions. Now, as we look at history, we can see how technology has had an absolute profound effect upon the world. And today, as we look at some of the emerging technologies, we see some that are just incredibly high impact technologies that will have a significant impact on the world. So we've seen what the internet has done, but the internet is maturing, and we're going to move into this Internet of Things. And what that means is that everything from a cell phone to a washing machine to headphones to wearable devices, all of that's going to be connected to the internet. And that data is going to be used to simplify processes, to automate processes. And all of this means that data analytics, big data is going to continue to grow in importance. It also means that knowledge automation and knowledge assistance. I don't know if you're familiar with IBM Watson. In my work with IBM, that technology is absolutely profound, and they're beginning to apply that technology more broadly. And so there's going to be a growth in social networking capabilities. 3D printing. It's amazing what 3D printing is going to potentially do to manufacturing processes. And so there are a number of very profound technologies that are emerging. Now, Michael Rendell, he is the head of human capital consulting at PricewaterhouseCoopers. He wrote this. He said, disruptive innovations are creating new industries and new business models, and they're destroying old ones. And he says that new technologies and data analytics and social networks are having a huge impact on how people communicate, how they collaborate, how they work. And he says, as generations collide, workforces are going to become more diverse, and people are going to work longer. They're going to work until they're older. And then he finishes by saying, traditional career models may soon be a thing of the past. So what does all of this mean? Well, there's a lot of information there, but if we try to synthesize it means that people are going to become more informed, they're going to become better educated, they're going to want to and really need to be able to collaborate more, people are going to become more influential, hopefully more people will have more discretionary money, but on a negative note, there are going to be a lot more players in the marketplace. There's going to be a lot more competition in the marketplace, and we're becoming we're becoming a smaller, shrinking world. So this means that innovation is going to be the engine. It's going to be the engine. When we talk about innovation, we're not just talking about innovation in terms of new products and services, but innovation in terms of business models, innovations in terms of operational improvement. So innovation is going to be at the key. It's important today, but it has to become increasingly important as we move towards the future. More collaboration is going to be important. We'll be looking at needing to have flatter organizational structures, smaller teams, global teams, and we're going to see a big growth in networks, especially in specialization networks. Now, with that as background, let's go ahead and focus on what I absolutely believe is the biggest leadership challenge and the biggest opportunity today. And it's really around employee potential and employee passion and employee engagement. And we know that according to Gallop, and this is based on their research that to date has involved over 25 million survey results from employees in 195 different countries, that only about 13% of employees are engaged in their work. That means that they're committed to their job. That means that they're committed to their organization. So only 1 in 8 workers feel like they're making a positive contribution and are committed. And 63% of employees, they're not engaged in the work. They've checked out. They're just going through the motions. They're doing their job, but they're not doing it with passion. They're not doing it with energy. And 24% of the workforce is actively disengaged. These people are extremely unhappy at work. So we look at this and we see that there are almost twice as many actively disengaged workers as there are engaged workers in an organization. And Gallop, if you look just at the active disengagement problem, they estimate that the cost of this within the United States alone runs between $450 and $550 billion. Now, Deloitte has also conducted their own study, and they have focused not just on employee engagement, they focused on passion. And what they have found is that up to 88%, almost 88% of America's workforce is not able to contribute to their full potential because they don't have passion for their work. And they write this: in today's rapidly changing business environment, companies need passionate workers, because it's those passionate workers that really drive extreme and sustained performance improvements. And they wrote this as well: many companies, they do not recognize the value of worker passion. In fact, they view it with suspicion. Now, let's switch gears and talk about the solution. And this is what I'm most excited about. It's this inside-out approach to leadership and to reinvention. Now, before we jump into that, let me share how important this topic is. So leaders throughout the world, they often talk about how putting their people first is really their priority. But then they treat their people like replaceable components. And when we think about it, we're dealing with people. We're dealing with employees that spend the prime of their lives. They spend the prime of their days making a living. And work, it plays such a significant role in how we feel about ourselves. It impacts us physically. It impacts us emotionally, mentally, and even spiritually. Now, I used to work for Franklin Covey. And Stephen R. Covey is a man that I respect immensely. And he used to teach us about the importance of thinking win-win. And in his own words, he described this as a frame of mind and heart that constantly seeks mutual benefit in all human interactions. And this win-win is really not just a win-win between people, but it should be a win-win between the organizations and their employees. Now, it's easy for an organization to forget that because they're really in the power position. But they do have a win-win responsibility with their employees. Now, this inside-out approach that I'm going to share with you really builds on win-win as the foundation. So the benefits of this model that I'm going to share with you include you're going to end up, if you go through this process right, significant growth in employee passion and potentials. Leaders are going to learn how to better help their people to be able to succeed. You'll begin to build a strength-based culture. You'll begin to develop and implement strategies that your people are a part of and they're passionate about. And you'll begin to design structures to be able to help your employees and to help your organization succeed, again, in a powerful win-win manner. So this approach that I'm going to share with you is not just a survey. Now, a lot of people understand that there's an employee engagement problem, and so what do? Well, they issue out a survey, and then they might identify some improvements based on the survey that they're going to focus on, or they might conduct a workshop, or they might make some adjustments to the performance appraisal system. These approaches are somewhat helpful, but they're a far cry from what needs to be done. They're not sufficient, and they oftentimes lead to disappointments. Now, this inside-out approach, what it does is it looks at employee potential, and it looks at passion, and it looks at it systemically. There's some systemic problems, and so it looks at these problems systemically. And this approach, it deserves time. It's not just a survey. It deserves careful attention. It deserves rigor because you're creating a new impassioned organization. So you want to do this right, and it's a team or a teams-based effort. And like the inside-out approach, you want to make sure and use a very transparent and a very inclusive change management approach so that you can get the best ideas, so you can create commitment, and so that you can reduce implementation cycle times. Now, this seems like it might be a lot to invest, but as you look at companies like Google, Google is identified as the best company to work for. It's also the second most admired company in the world. This is what they do. And so what your teams go through, and your stakeholders, they go through a process of assessing the organization based on the inside-out approach that I'll share with you. They'll do best practice research. They'll come up with their own creative ideas. They'll design, they'll pilot, and they'll implement. So that's the process that you go through. Now, employee potential and passion is at the core of this model. Now, this model is powerful. The outside-in model is powerful as well. It focuses on the customer, but this focuses on the employee, that key resource. And the big question that you're trying to answer is, what is the best way to help your employees to discover, to become passionate about, and to reach their potential and the organization's purpose? So what are some of the keys to really tapping in and unleashing employee passion and potential? Well, there's this belief that you want to develop, that each person genuinely has a unique passion, has unique talents, and has strengths that can make their team, that can make their organization, that can make even the world a better place. And so you want to help your employees really find that sweet spot where they're most passionate and where they can really make the greatest difference. And you want to provide abundant opportunities for your employees to be able to focus and build upon their strengths. Now, one of the most powerful things that you can do to help your employees develop real expertise in their areas of desired strength is through deliberative practice. Now, Benjamin Bloom, he published a landmark book, and it was titled Developing Talent in Young People. And what he did is he took a deep look at the childhoods of over 120 very elite performers, individuals that had won international competitions or awards in the fields of music, art, mathematics, neurology, and so forth. And what he was trying to find out is what's the key indicator? What's going to tell us ahead of time who's going to be powerfully successful? And he couldn't find anything. The one thing that emerges from his work, however, is that those superb performers that he had investigated, they had practiced intensely, they had studied with devoted teachers, and they had been supported enthusiastically. Now, K. Anders Ericsson, he's also a guru in the area of developing expertise. And he said, okay, practice, deliberative practice is critically important. And he says that's different from how most people practice and try to learn to excel. He says those that really excel and those that are experts, what they do is they break down the behaviors, they break down the skills that they want to acquire into tiny actions. And then they repeat them endlessly. And each time they repeat them, they observe what happens. And they make minor and almost imperceptible adjustments. And so what we want to do is we want to encourage, we want to help your employees to define the strengths that they want. We want to help them to break those into tiny actions and to deliberately practice. We want to give them, if we can, if it makes sense, to opportunities to practice and to perfect their desired strengths as part of their work. Now, the most important key for this model to be able to work, for you to have the kind of benefits that you would like to have within your organization, is you need to develop leadership that knows how to unleash the potential and the passions of your people. Now, unfortunately, in many organizations, when it comes to leadership, there's a struggle. So we know what emotional intelligence is. Emotional intelligence is the ability of people to be able to understand their emotions and understand the emotions of others so that they can use that information to guide their thinking and to guide their behavior. And Travis Bradberry, he's the author of the book, the best-selling book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0, and he's also the CEO or co-founder of TalentSmart. They went and they analyzed. They have over 1 million profiles, EQ, emotional intelligence scores. They have over 1 million profiles, and they went and they analyzed this data, and they sorted it by organizational title, by job title. And what did they find? CEOs, unfortunately, have the lowest EQ scores of all. That means that CEOs really don't have the skill, or they don't have the desire to really understand the emotions of other people. But it's interesting, those CEOs that are most successful, according to Travis, are those that really have the highest EQ scores. So we need to really understand together what leadership really is. Now, based on research that Gallop conducted between the years 2005 and 2008, they found that what the average person values the most in a leader is 1, trust, 2, compassion, 3, providing a sense of stability, 4, providing a hope, a sense of a bright future. So that's what people really desire. And Gallup also found, this is based on exhaustive research as well, they were trying to figure out what the difference was between high-performing teams and organizations and those that were not. And so as they refined their questions, they found that one question was most predictive to determine whether or not a person was part of a high-performing organization. And that question was this: at work, do you have an opportunity to focus on your strengths every day? And people that are able to focus on their strengths, it's been proven repeatedly that if people are able to focus on those strengths more often, they are considerably more productive. They're more successful in every aspect of their work. Now, this leads us to culture. So the real question is, what kind of culture do we want to create? We want to create, obviously, the most effective culture that we possibly can. And if I went and looked at your cultures, we would identify today, we'd probably identify a wide variety of different cultures. But what's interesting is really to look at those cultures that are prominent in some of the most successful organizations. So you look at Google. Their culture, they're very mission-oriented. They have a mission that genuinely inspires people. It's not just a mission that talks about financial measures, but they have a mission that genuinely inspires people, and they strive to create a very transparent, a very open, a very inclusive workforce, and they focus on giving everyone voice, giving everyone a say. We all want to be able to control our destinies. And so Google strives to be able to provide people their voice. Now, if we look at what kind of culture we really want to develop, and we look at Gallup's data, we might want to consider establishing a strength-based culture, one that focuses on the passions, one that focuses on the strengths of each person, one that shares a passion, shares a mission. We want to create a culture that's collaborative and team-based. And we want leaders. It's interesting to look at what Google does, what kind of leaders that they focus on. We want to have leaders that help employees to become powerful contributors and to become leaders themselves. So let's talk about strategy. This is another key component of creating a breakthrough organization. What you want to do is use a strategy development and implementation approach that inspires and engages your people. And if you look at most strategy approaches in organizations, a lot of them are top-down. So the executives take off, they go into a workshop, they define the strategies, and then they provide directions to everyone. And many organizations' strategies are a power-based exercise where people are trying to create their own empires. And then you've got different strategy models that they're helpful, they're analytical, they're helpful in helping you to make sure that you're methodical in developing your strategy. But Simon Sinek, he shared with us some insights that were extremely powerful. Now, Simon Sinek, if you don't know him, he wrote the book Start with the Why. And incidentally, he gave a TED presentation back, I believe, in 2009. And his presentation has had over 22 million views to date. And what he says is what you want to do is you want to start. You want to start from the inside out. And if you look at it, when you look at customers, those people that actually buy your products and services, nowadays more than ever, people want to buy not what you do, but they want to buy why you do it. And if you look at brand and how important brand is in motivating people to purchase, this fact it becomes more and more obvious. And Simon, he argues, he says, when we speak from the outside in, which is typically how we go about strategy, when we speak from the outside in, we're speaking rationally. And he said, granted, we can understand vast amounts of complicated information like features and benefits and so forth. But he says that information, that doesn't drive behavior. He says when we talk from the inside out, we speak to the heart. And that behavior, that when we speak from the inside out, that speaks directly to behavior. And your goal really is to sell to people that believe how you believe. So it's important as you start your strategy development process that you define your why. And you create engagement and passion around that you find your sweet spot. Now your strategy development and implementation process should be a very transparent, it should be a very inclusive process. That this strategy development gives you the opportunity to get people engaged, to get people excited. And we know how important passion is to the organization. Now, finally, we take a look at the structures of the organization. Now, Tom Northrup, he wrote, all organizations are perfectly designed to get the results that they're getting now. And if we want different results, we must change the way that we do things. So what we need to do is we need to optimize both employee passion and potential, and we need to optimize our structures so they also help us from a business success perspective. And so what we need to do is we need to develop organizational structures. We need to review our organizational structures. We need to look at our roles and responsibilities. We need to look at our decision-making processes, our information flows, how we go about recognizing and promoting people, how we train people, from the perspective of how do we most successfully optimize both employee passion and potential and business success. Now, if we look at a lot of organizational models, for instance, they're built upon organizational theories that have been around for over 250 years. We know that innovation is becoming more important. And we talked about how collaboration, how creativity is increasingly important. And bigger companies that are more progressive are beginning to say, you know what we need to do is create mini companies so that people are more empowered. We need to create flatter organizational structures. And we need to have smaller teams, and these teams need to be global. So, again, by going through this inside-out approach and using the change management approach that I've described, what is it going to do? Well, over time, it's going to lead to significant growth in employee passions and potentials. It'll help your leaders. They'll be getting training as they actually go through this process to learn how to better help their people to succeed. You'll begin, because people have gone through a common set of experiences and will have a common vision and passion, you'll begin to develop a strength-based culture. And you'll begin to create strategies. You'll create strategy development and implementation processes that your people are a part of, that they can become passionate about. And you'll begin to improve your structures so that they're better designed to be able to help your employees and your organizations to succeed. Now, I'm going to go ahead and close pretty quick here. At Breakthrough Practice, what do we do? Well, we facilitate and we help leaders and organizations to go through this inside-out approach. We've been in the business of helping organizations to go through reinventions for 20 years. And then we also provide creating you workshops, and these are workshops to help individuals really find their sweet spots and helping them to learn how to turn that vision into a reality. So what I've done here is provided a slide so you have my contact information if you're interested in touching base with me. And what I'll like to do is turn the time back over to the moderator.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Willden, for a very, very intriguing presentation. Folks, we are open for question and answers. If you have any questions, you could either put it in the question box or you could raise your hand. There's a hand icon available on the webinar console. If you click on it, that will give you an opportunity to speak with Mr. David Holm. So please either put the questions in the question box or raise your hand. There's a hand raised already, but let me find out. Oh, Mr. DF, could you please introduce yourself? You have raised a hand or ask a question? Hello? I believe you have an audio connectivity issue. So let me go to the question box. Sir Willden, could you please elaborate the importance of trust? How should one build trust blindly, or it has to be gained through experience?
You know, I think that's a very important question. You know, it really does come down to trust. And if you look at the most admired, the best companies to work for, you look at the organization that actually produces those results, that does the survey work, that analyzes the organization. It's called the Great Place to Work organization. They find that trust is the most important leadership trait that is needed. And what does trust really mean? It means that the employee, from the perspective of the employee, it means that the employee really can depend, they can count on the leader. And they know that the leader has their back, that the leader really cares about them. So you're right. You know, I know of people, you can meet certain people, and certain people are just genuinely good. They're trustworthy people. You know that, you can feel that. So the question is, how can you create a culture of trust? Doesn't trust need to be earned? And I think that that's absolutely correct. Now, can a person change? Can a leader change? Absolutely. Does change happen instantly? No. Change happens one step at a time. So I think that's a very fair question. I do think that trust has to be earned, but I do believe that people can change. There's no question that people can change. So great question.
Well, thank you very much. We have another short one. What steps one should take to initiate innovative culture within the organizations?
Could you repeat the second part of that?
What steps needs to be taken to initiate innovative culture within the organizations?
So what are the steps to really begin this process? Is that the essence of the question? Let me go ahead and jump in and assume that that's the case. So probably the most direct way to really be able to have an impact is to establish a relationship with the CEO, if you possibly can do that. Now, if you're within an organization and you don't have that kind of relationship, what can you do? So let's assume that you're not a leader at this point, and you really believe strongly in these concepts that we've discussed today. What can you do? Well, one thing that you can do is you can begin to share with others your passion. You can share with others in a respectful manner, not in a threatening manner, the things that you've learned. You can try to teach people by your example. Now, I was in this situation in my first organization, and I had gone around and I'd studied best organizations, really understood their practices, and at the time I was a very junior person. And what I became so passionate myself about how our organization could improve that I began to share that with people, and people could feel my passion. And I tried to practice what I learned, and I created opportunities to share my finding with ultimately the CEO and the executive vice presidents of the organization. And over a period of time, this didn't happen initially. Over a period of time, I began to bring in speakers, and I began to get them to agree to conduct some pilot initiatives. And we began to have success, and then before I knew it, because of the success that we had, they actually promoted me so that I was working for the CEO of the company, and our efforts just took off. But the more direct approach is to just try to communicate well, to understand the opportunities here, to really find those people within the organization that are trustworthy leaders, begin to establish a relationship with them, share your findings with them, and figure out together how you can begin to help the organization. So there's not always a clear-cut approach, but whenever you can, you find out who has the same passions that you begin to figure out together what you can do, and that process does work. Of course, a quicker approach is to go right to the CEO and share the merits, have an open and honest discussion. Oftentimes, an outsider can do that best.
Thank you very much. We have another interesting one. There's a lot of talk on big data and future holds success for those only who manages the information overload. What are your views on organizations who are ignoring the big data?
I think that organizations that are ignoring big data are taking a huge risk. Those organizations that are learning how to look at data, learning how to see patterns in that data, learning how to predict what people are going to do, are going to be better prepared in terms of being able to design new products and services. They're going to be better prepared in terms of how to improve their operations. They're going to be better able to understand what people really think, what drives behavior. I do see that many organizations, they look at this big data and they look at the costs of collecting that data, trying to find some value in it, trying to come up with some predictions in terms of what does the data mean and how can it help us from a business perspective. I think there's a lot of wasted time and energy in many organizations and knowing what to do with big data. And so I think that there needs to be a clear focus. There needs to be a clear understanding in terms of what goals it is you're hoping to be able to achieve. You need to, and so that's I think that's really the key, is just, what is the big data going to do for you? How do you go about analyzing it? What is the value that you hope to get from it? I've seen organizations, so we've got eBay where I'm located, and as I talk with some of the eBay executives, it's amazing what they're able to do with big data.
Thank you very much. We have another.
Any other question that comes to mind?
Yeah, we have another one, sir. Mr. Willden, seems your webinar is more useful for top-down approach, but how to drive change if you are in the middle management?
My experience is, as I've gone in and worked with the executives, typically I've been able to point to someone within the organization, a mid-level manager that had been practicing these principles, had been practicing these concepts, and we were able to point to that person as a reason why this methodology was so important. And when people can see within their organization best practices, that connects with them. So as I help people to actually go through best practice research, for instance, we don't just help them focus on the best within their industry or outside of their industry. We help them to focus on the people internally that are really practicing these principles. So as I worked for Stephen R. Covey, he talked about the importance of looking at our span of control. So we're not going to always be able to change everything around us, but what we can do is we can look within our organization and we can say, boy, these principles are true, and I really want to implement them. What can I do? And we don't want to, be too risky. Sometimes people that are innovators can can try to change the whole world, but let's just look at yourself as a pilot effort. So in many ways, it can be the best way to help the organization to improve. So, don't wait for permission. If you really believe in these principles and these concepts, I believe that we each have an obligation as leaders we have a moral obligation to those that we lead to really be the best leaders that we possibly can.
All right, we can take one last question. Thank you very much. One last question we'll take from Mr. Andre Jakowitz. The question is there a forum or community which we can visit to help facilitate and implement these ideas?
The UK, so there is a website called Engage for Success. And the UK realized a number of years ago, and the Prime Minister, David Cameron, mentioned that this problem of employee engagement was a huge problem within the UK, and productivity was a problem. And so they said, we need to really focus on trying to help the whole nation, trying to help all the organizations really address this problem of employee engagement. So they put together a task force, and this task force, and you can learn about it by going to Engage for Success. You'll have to Google that. You can find some good information. They have a variety of different events, for instance, where people come in and speak about that topic. So that is, I believe, the best resource. And then also Gallop. Gallop has done some incredible research. And so when it comes to research, when it comes to data, they provide some useful information. In terms of having a group that's just focused of CEOs and HR leaders, where they can come into a forum and share information on the specific topic, I haven't seen it. And so to the extent that I'd like to see it, so that actually creates, I think, an enormous opportunity. I think we ought to do that.
Okay, that really brings us towards the end of the webinar, Mr. Willden. Any concluding remarks that you would like to give before we dismiss out, sir?
No, it was a joy to be able to be part of this webinar, and I've had a chance to look at your organization, Mile, and I'm deeply impressed with the quality of work that you do. I'm deeply impressed with the caliber of people that you have involved. I'm just, and I don't say this to flatter you, but I say this because it means a lot to me because of my passion, I'm sure your passion, to see an organization that really cares about helping people to grow and to improve in leadership skills and leadership capabilities. So I do appreciate very much having the opportunity to be part of your webinar today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And I really want to thank you on behalf of the Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, MILE. Needless to mention, it's not possible with the cooperation of yourself and other speakers and practitioners who have been regularly remaining engaged with us on this virtual platform and equally coming to the kingdom to deliver the programs with us. And we really appreciate your time once again. And thank you all of those who participated in this webinar and for the questions and for making it interactive experience for all of us. So with that note, I would like to conclude this webinar, so you all will be automatically dismissed out. Thank you very much. You all have a good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're calling from. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, MILE.